I'm Chris Carter. This is the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we take a lot of your questions, including one about how double tight end formations could be a much bigger part of the Steelers offense than before. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs have winded down, sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone all day, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Steelers fans, hope you had a great weekend. Let's get into some questions here from some people. Pardon me, I'm dealing with some allergies and I might sneeze a few times during the show, but I think it's been interesting to talk about the different parts of this offense, and I've touched on the tight end position in general. I've touched on different things that you'd like to see there, but I want to dip back into the possibility of using double tight end sets and get a few more things in here. And that's something that some of you all have been expressing in the Callin Line, which, by the way, you can call into at 412-223-6644. You call that number. Also, for those who are calling from collect numbers and can't get through, I do apologize. It's just a voicemail service. So if you're calling, there's people who are calling and can't get through that way. I apologize for that. I don't know how to get around that thing there. But anyways, I want to go to this question here because it tees off the whole double tight ends conversation, and it sent me on like a little research rabbit hole that I went on for a little bit and just thinking about things and plotting out how things could go. But here was Mark from Warren, Ohio, who asked this question.
Hello, Chris. This is Mark Hilliard from Warren, Ohio. Hey, considering Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator, I thought that he would like to use a double tight end set, which would only leave George Pickens on the field and not a number 2 wide receiver. And in passing situations, wouldn't it be interesting to have Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin III on the field at the same time, 2 very fast speedsters? And that's all I have. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Mark, for your question. Appreciate you calling in, 412-223-6644. Leave us your name, where you're from. Give you a question under a minute. We'll try to get you on the show. So before we get to the Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin bit, let's go over the double tight ends formations part here. First, clarifying, if a team is using double tight ends, it does not mean that they will only have 1 wide receiver, because a lot of double tight ends formations are 2 tight ends, 2 receivers, 1 running back. Now, if a team used double tight ends and double running backs, then there would be 1 wide receiver, but there would still need to be a second wide receiver on most traditional tight end formations, because that's more of the 12 personnel. That's the one that a lot of people get at there, with 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers. But to your point about Arthur Smith, yes, historically, Arthur Smith, has been a person to use double tight ends when he's been the offensive coordinator. In fact, when you go back and you look at 2019 and 2020 combined over those 2 years, the Titans, his offense, ranked in 2020, used it 413 times. That would have been third most of any team. It was actually the most in 2020, and was the third most of all during those years. The Titans in 2019 did 320 snaps. That would have been, I think, 5th most in 2019, and was 11th most between 2019 and 2020, looking at those. So all that to say, in past offenses, he has done that. Now, granted, it's all about personnel and how you use them. In the Titans offense that year, I think there were some similarities that you can look at there. There was A.J. Brown was your leading receiver, but there wasn't another bona fide star receiver to go with him. They did have Derrick Henry at running back, but they went with Jonnu Smith and Corey Davis as their tight ends, who kind of doubled up, and they combined for 1,000 yards receiving between those two tight ends. And that's where the kind of use came from there. And that's where I think it is an interesting comparison for the Steelers are, because right now there is no bona fide established number 2 wide receiver. There is a number 1 in George Pickens, but you have tight end that you're expecting to be productive in this offense, and that's Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. And I think that there's still other dynamics to get into between how to use them. And that's what I'll get into in a bit here. But I think that's the thing that the Steelers do need to tap into at some point for their offense. If you go back to this past year, even with Darnell Washington being used, I mean, he started a couple games and he was used a lot this season, as was Connor Hayward. But even with that, the Steelers used double tight end formations just 193 times last year. That was 25th most of the NFL. That's like, so they were towards the bottom of the league in doing it, even though I'd say that their tight end position was as deep as it's been in my memory. And maybe that's a little bit of a stretch with Darnell Washington because he's not a true receiving tight end yet, but with his ability to block and Pat Freiermuth's potential, and then Connor Hayward as a third option. I mean, I think you'd have to go back to the Heath Miller days when they had like him and Matt Spaeth to be like, oh yeah, that was the last time that this tight end room was really deep. And again, then there's Rodney Williams, who would have been I think a solid number 2 option in other years where the tight end list depth chart was really thin, but he was just they have so much depth there that he's a practice squad guy. So all that to say, I think the Steelers got depth at tight end, but I think the key here is how Arthur Smith is going to use them in these double tight end sets. I don't know if the Steelers will be in the top 3 or top 5 in tight end in how many times double tight end is used. I do think it will be used a lot more often than it was last year, because I think Arthur Smith, he's talked a lot about physicality. We've shown clips of Troy Fautanu, the rookie offensive tackle they drafted in the first round this year, talk about how Arthur Smith had like PowerPoints where he was going over with the offense point by point about how they're going to be more physical, more strong at the point of attack. That's going to be an emphasis, and it makes more sense to get bigger bodies out there. And Darnell Washington is one of the biggest bodies you could get as far as extra blockers on the field from skill position guys. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they work him and Freiermuth into this more often to get them on the field. And again, the dual threat of both of them being potential blockers and potential receivers to give matchup problems for defenses, and also to flex around with what kind of formations you want to use. But it's how they're used that I think is going to be very interesting for Arthur Smith and the different spots they are. And I think that could be one of the bigger critiques and coaching points that we see for the Steelers coming up this season. I want to address more of that specifically, as well as get to other questions, including one about another backup quarterback we have not talked a lot about, and that's our undrafted rookie that they got in John Rhys Plumlee. We'll get into all that more here next on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We will be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. I love sports, and I love them so much that I never want them to stop. And whereas the NBA and the NHL have stopped and there's fewer games there, there's still plenty of action to get into on FanDuel.com. So you can look around. You can see action in the WNBA. You can see action in MLB. There's big fights all the time that you can look at. There's tennis going on right now. And there's so much action in sports. You got to get into it on FanDuel right now. And FanDuel right now is hooking up all customers, whether you're new or returning, with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So right now, head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. That's FanDuel, official sportsbook partner and betting partner of Major League Baseball. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue with the show here today, and I want to finish my point about the tight ends, because I do think there will be an interesting critique point of how they're used this season, because we've seen the potential for them. And I truly think last year, whereas Darnell Washington was not a prime route runner and he needed to figure some things out in the receiving game, it was part of the long line of issues that I had with last year's offense, that he was not just throwing the ball more naturally. And when I say naturally, I mean not in some crazy trying to ask him to run a corner route when he can't run a corner route. I'm saying when he ran to the flat and was left wide open in the flat and he had no one within 5 yards of him, that he wasn't getting the ball there, because that's a guy who, when he catches the ball, turns and gets upfield, not only will he get those 5 yards, when someone eventually gets to him, he will truck them and probably fall forward or keep going. And it's just, that's how was that not used? Also, when you're one of the worst red zone offenses in the NFL, how wasn't he a guy that was just said, hey, just go to the pylon, we're going to throw it to the back, just go up and get it, because you're 6'7" and you're probably going to out jump some people. I think things like that will be part of this offense, but it's not just that part of it that I think will be a critiquing point for the Steelers coaches. I really think a big part of what's going to happen, or what's going to need to happen, is for when the Steelers are calling key run plays. And again, one thing we're going to be looking to see with this Arthur Smith offense is, what are the bread and butter plays, and especially the bread and butter run plays, because we've talked about they're going to be pulling a lot of guys, they're going to be asking guys to hit in space, they're going to be asking guys to double team. There's going to be all sorts of facts there, but how they use the tight ends, especially if they're going to use a much heavier dosage of double tight end, how they use the tight ends in those different spots is going to be very strategic as well, because I could see a situation where they come out in double tight end formations, and so they got, again, 2 receivers, so George Pickens, and let's say for sake of now, Calvin Austin's your number 2 right now, and then you have Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, then you have Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren. That's the combination there. So you could have that be your personnel, but then you could come out and you can put Pat Freiermuth in the slot and say, hey, Pat, line up over here. Darnell's going to be the prime, like the traditional old school tight end with the hand in the dirt. And he's going to be the guy that they run behind. And I think that's going to be the interesting part here is, does Arthur Smith get his wires crossed with where he uses both of these guys? Because both of these guys have, in Freiermuth and Washington, have different skill sets. Pat Freiermuth is that route runner who can go get the football and make plays in the passing game. He's getting better as a blocker, but he's still not where you want your superstar tight end to be as a blocker. And I think that's where the Steelers want more improvement of him. Whereas Darnell Washington, you love him blocking at the point of attack. He will go crush somebody. He uses his long frame, his size, his strength, his aggression. He's all about that. But getting open, that's another story, because he's not the most coordinated route runner as far as especially out of the tight end position. So looking at those factors, you obviously are going to want to use Darnell Washington more at the point of attack. And I think that's going to be something to watch for after like the first 3-4 games. When the Steelers are running the ball and they're having double tight end formations, how are they using Darnell Washington versus Pat Freiermuth, and how is that helping or hurting the Steelers' run game? And I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on. And it's one of those things where it's not a thing that could necessarily be bad. It could actually end up being good. But this is one of those things where when people get mad at the end of the game because your favorite team lost or whatever, and they blame the coach, people don't know where to go. We're like, oh, well, I just didn't like this challenge, or I didn't like this there. And it's like, that's not what decided the game. But in structural points and strategizing, that's where I think that we can break that down. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. And you can remember this episode specifically that I'm pointing at this right now, that how those tight ends are used in the run game and then eventually the pass game is going to need to be a big part of what this upcoming Steelers offense looks like. And if it's not done correctly, it could be a big hitch in one of the first problems that Arthur Smith encounters in trying to build back up this offense into being a respectable unit in the NFL. All right, enough on tight ends. Let's get to the quarterback question, because I've had a few people ask about this guy. So we're going to get into it just a little bit here on a backup quarterback. Here's Richard from Las Vegas.
Hey, Chris, this is Richard from Las Vegas. Just a question about a quarterback we have on our undrafted list. His name would be John Rhys Plumlee. What do you think about him? It seems to me like he's a very quick guy. He's a runner, a good passer, and a good thinker. Give me your input on that and why he doesn't get a chance as quarterback. I watched a few of his games, and it seems like he's a real good player. Thanks, bud. Bye.
Thank you for your question, Richard. Appreciate everyone who calls into the Locked On Steelers hotline at 412-223-6644. So let's get into a few things about John Rhys Plumlee. So if you don't know who that is, and maybe you just didn't pay attention to like OTAs and stuff, he was an undrafted free agent for the Steelers. He was a quarterback most recently for University of Central Florida. He led them to a 5-5 record in 2023, an 8-5 record in 2022. Also, which was actually a pretty good season for UCF that year. In his 2 years starting for UCF, he combined for 34 touchdowns and 19 interceptions. And he was a good, fine college quarterback, and especially for where he was. But the thing is that he still has a long way to go as far as traits to get there to be in the conversation with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. For example, Russell Wilson played in the ACC. Justin Fields played in the Big Ten and national playoff games, and was dominant in doing so. Like these were guys who were exciting at their levels. John Rhys Plumlee is exciting. He's certainly an athlete. And for those, if you look up his rushing numbers, that's also where he made his hay. In 2022, he rushed 159 times for 862 yards. By the way, it's an average of 5.4 yards per carry. Granted, quarterbacks have an easier time running sometimes, but he also rushed for 11 touchdowns that year. Now, it dropped a bit in 2023, 106 rushes for 505 yards, average of 4.8, and only had 5 touchdowns. But still, he is going to be a guy that can use his legs, and that does excite the Steelers a little bit. And there has been, jokes about him helping out on kickoff team and seeming like that. We'll see how that makes progress. But the reason why you're not hearing about him is because he's an undrafted rookie for a reason, and that doesn't mean that he shouldn't keep trying. It doesn't mean he shouldn't keep fighting, and he should just give up before camp starts. But there's a realistic depth chart in place right now with 2 guys vying for that number 1 spot, and maybe he beats out Kyle Allen for the 3rd spot. Who knows? But in my eyes, when we're looking at how this Steelers offense and this quarterback, it's Russell Wilson's job. When this quarterback depth chart is being built out, he has a tall hill to climb to get into that 3rd conversation. But, as a person, if you're a person who's been a long listener and follower of this show back before I was the solo host, when I was co-hosting with Tony Serino, you might remember some of those long summer days when we were there at Steelers training camp, and Tony used to be on here, and he used to say, I love me some Devlin Hodges. And I'd be like, Tony, they're going to cut him. Stop bringing this up. Why do you keep bringing up Devlin Hodges? And then lo and behold, with all the injuries that happened that year, Devlin Hodges ended up starting and winning a few games for the Steelers that year. And that was just so insane. So maybe if all things go wrong for the Steelers, maybe John Rhys Plumlee takes the field at quarterback and makes a few plays. But I think if that happens, there's a lot of other really bad things that happen in the first place, and it's going to mean an even rougher season for the Steelers. But again, look, he's athletic. He's going to be fun. I think he'll be a fun guy to watch in camp. I think he'll be cool on the scout teams, but he will be running the scout teams, probably throughout this process. And I think that'll be interesting to see how he navigates that. And if he sticks around, great. And it's an athletic guy there. I think the main thing that you might see him get used for is when the Steelers, they love to have fast guys, work the scout teams as the faster quarterbacks, especially when they prepare for Lamar Jackson, and they'll have guys do that. That might be the thing that keeps him around on the practice squad the most, because the Steelers then don't have to try to, tell Calvin Austin, hey, go pretend to be Lamar Jackson real quick for the defense. No, they can have John Rhys Plumlee just be him in the scout team, and that be the thing to look out for. So I think it's a fine question to get into there. But yeah, that's the reason why he's not going to be on the front list of much there. We got to take one more break. When we come back, I want to answer 2 more questions. One, about the potential of another expansion of the NFL season and how crazy that is, and 2, something about DeMarvin Leal, and I think the position that he could still be a flexible player that really helps the Steelers. But if that is actually something the Steelers should want, we'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter. We'll be right back. But first, we'll remind you this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We keep our questions rolling here. There's some of these questions that I have kind of let sit around because they were more so July questions than necessarily, middle of the NFL draft questions. But this one was one that I wanted to hold on for the special time. And this one's from David out in Wake Forest, North Carolina. David, take it away.
Hey, Chris. David from Wake Forest, North Carolina again. Hey, quick question. I've been hearing people talking about an 18-game season. I'm sure the players do not want it, and I just thought it'd be fun. What do you think it would take for the players to be okay with that? Or coaches, maybe we do a 2 buys in a season instead of 1. Maybe bump it up to a 55-man roster, something like that to offset the physical rigors of a full 18-game season. Anyway, just for fun, just thought I'd like to hear your input. Have a good one.
Thank you, David. Appreciate your questions as always, especially all of our callers who call in 412-223-6644. So here's the thing, David. I 100% agree with you. If they bump this up to 18 games, players should be pounding the table for 2, maybe even 3 bye weeks at this point. Because to be honest, when they moved it up to 17-game seasons, and especially with all these Christmas Day games on Wednesday and all this crazy stuff, the players need to be able to put their foot down and be like, look, we need more rest. We need more opportunities to protect our guys. We need, and I think, rosters should get expanded to include more guys. But it's one of those things where the owners are going to push for what they want, and they're going to tell the players, we can't afford that. And the players are going to be like, yes, you can. And then the owners are going to try to take it out of their paycheck. And that's where I think all of this gets to be really crazy. But I'm 100% with you, Dave. It is already crazy to ask them to add on to what was a 16-game season in a sport that just severely beats up its players. It's just a reality. And an 18-game season, I know there's some Steelers fan that is like, Chris, are you crazy? I would love an 18th game. I would love to go to another game this season. And now you got 2 sets of 9. It's even again. It'd be perfect. I hear you, but I'm also thinking of the players. I'm also thinking of me, man. Chris needs a break now and then. I haven't taken a vacation yet this year, and training camps in 3 weeks. But in all seriousness, I think that there is we see a lot of teams get beat up down the stretch, and I also think this is one of the biggest hitches of football. Sometimes is that oftentimes the best teams don't go on runs in football. And it's fine when it's just you just got beat out in a one and done format. That's part of what makes March Madness great for college basketball, right? It's, anybody can get upsets. But in football, so many times the team that was like great all season is just shredded with injuries at the end of the year because of how physical the sport is. And that can't be stopped. But it can be helped to not make worse of a problem, which is what would be happening if you make it an 18-game season. And so my thing comes back to where David said, because again, when they moved to the 17 games, I thought naturally they're going to add another bye week. And it also just makes sense to have another bye week. This is something I never understood about the NFL. Think about it this way. When you add a bye week on for every team, it doesn't mean that there's less games. It just lengthens your regular season. So now, instead of having, like right now, every team plays 17 games, but there's 18 weeks in the regular season because every team's going to have 1 week off. Cool. Now with every team having to take 2 weeks off and you add another game, now you're going from an 18-week season to a 20-week season. And if you even upped it up to 3, that could be a 21-week season. And then you could be putting a higher priority. There's less games on Sunday at 1 o'clock, but now more people are tuning into those games because there's less of them, because you're spreading the games out a little bit more because more teams have these bye weeks. I think it's a big mistake that the NFL has been missing on. I think that they also are trying to find the best way to balance it. The NFL can be really slow with change sometimes. I mean, this is also a sport where, they're still using a metal chain tied to 2 sticks to determine who got a first down, when, in soccer, they can use a chip on the ball to know if someone was offsides. There's a lot of things the NFL is just really slow with, but this is one of them. I think an 18-game season is just insane to think about. And there already should be more bye weeks. And if they get an 18-game season, they need not just 2 bye weeks. Every team needs 3 bye weeks to spread this out, give these teams more rest, and help them be healthier throughout the season. So that's that question there. I want to get to our final question. This one calls from Dalton in Missouri, who was asking about DeMarvin Leal.
Hi, Chris. This is Dalton. I'm from Missouri. And my question is about our edge 4 spot. I just was listening to an episode where somebody asked about Mark Robinson moving out there. But what do you think about DeMarvin Leal moving to a full-time edge spot? It feels like we've added some depth on the D-line that's kind of pushed him out. So how do we feel about him playing as a full-time edge in run scenarios and first downs and stuff like that? Thanks.
Thank you for your question. Appreciate your questions as always. Thank you, Dalton, for your question. And thank you to everyone who calls into 412-223-6644. So DeMarvin Leal, let's get into a few things here, because I think that there's actually some interesting parts of this. DeMarvin Leal, when he was drafted, I actually said this when he was coming out of the draft. I said that, hey, that guy can be a flexible extra edge option. And he was used a very little bit amount of that in his rookie season back in 2022 when the Steelers brought him in, and he got hurt, but he was coming out a little bit more. But there were times that he lined up out there as sort of that fourth option. And I think that that's something that he can do. But we also saw him not play that much in 2023. And I think that's, that led to, some questions about, will he be around much moving forward? I think that he will be. I think that he's a heck of an athlete. And if he's made the progress that I think that he can make, I think DeMarvin Leal can be a force next to Keanu Benton, and they can be a really good 1-2 punch at the defensive line for the Steelers' future. But right now, could he be the 4th edge option on the team? And that's a question that I think, could be interesting. I also think the Steelers this might be another sort of like Quan Alexander situation, where like last year they waited to see what they had at linebacker, and then they got Quan Alexander in the middle of the camp, and then he just came in and was fine. I believe Marcus Golden, the guy who played for the Steelers last year, is the 3rd edge option next to Nick Herbig. I believe he's still a free agent unless I missed that signing recently. I think it could be very possible that he's and yeah, he is a free agent. I just Googled it right there. But I think it'd be very possible that he might be like, hey, I'm still in touch with y'all, but like I don't need to start training camp because I'm old. I don't need to come in there right away. And they might be like, yeah, we're gonna see what we have here with other edge guys and what we want to do, and then maybe we'll bring it back. So I think it's actually it's more likely that they'll sign a cheap veteran option as a 4th edge than DeMarvin Leal is like definitively a 4th edge option, because also this revolves around Nick Herbig being a really good 3rd option here. And I think he is a really good 3rd option based off of his rookie season, but I think he's going to need support, because now he's gone through a year. People are going to know what to look for from him. They're going to study him, and it's going to be interesting to see how other teams counter that. But so if they can get another player with him, that'd be great. But also if DeMarvin Leal can learn that too, that'd be nice. But I think DeMarvin Leal needs to be good at one thing, and that one thing should be on the defensive line, lining up on the interior and kicking butt. And if he can get that down, then you can talk about flexibility. But right now, I think DeMarvin Leal has not benefited from him being a jack of all trades but master of none when it comes to being a defensive lineman. I think that he has the potential to be very versatile. But in that versatility, I think that he hasn't had a chance to hone in on one thing and make it truly a problem for offensive linemen to deal with. And that's where I think DeMarvin Leal, if he focuses on that this upcoming year, and when I talked to him, I got a really good sense of, I think that his head's on straight. He's like, I know what I did wrong last year. I got to get on it this year. I think that he's looking to do that. And I think that he turned some heads too. We heard from the defensive line coach, Carl Dunbar, even defensive coordinator, Terrell Austin, both, talked about how they liked what they've seen from him going into this OTAs and mini camp. So I think that's a good sign, but I would not subscribe to DeMarvin Leal just being the fourth string edge rusher. I think that he could be a part of a flex part of that position where they move him around and put him there. But not a permanent part of it, just more of like hey, let's make this adjustment. Leal, bump out to the edge real quick. We're throwing in this package. That's how I think they'll use them. But thank you for the questions, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back to more, talking more about your Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.